Good morning, I'm Velvet with Quality Sewing and Vacuum, and thank you for joining me for How Do I? Today I'm going to show you how you can hem your t-shirts like a pro. So we have two different methods I'm going to show you today to hem the t-shirt, but first we have to start with deciding on how much of a hem we need. So normally you'd want to try your t-shirt on and then measure how much you want to cut off the bottom. Today I want mine to be 2 inches shorter. So I'm going to lay my t-shirt out now that I've made that decision. But instead of cutting 2 inches off, I'm going to only cut off 1.5 inches. And that's because I want to leave 1/2 inch for my seam allowance that's going to get folded under to make the hem. You can do yours larger or smaller depending on your preference, but we're going to go with 1/2 inch today. So now I'm going to grab a marking tool. And I'm going to grab a ruler. So this ruler here, each one of these squares on here is 1 inch. So this is going to make it really easy for me to measure my 1.5 inches. So I'll line it up against the bottom here. Now t-shirts, because they're stretchy, they like to move around a lot, and you might not be able to get it straight all the way across. Just do the portions where you can see that it is straight and then move your ruler accordingly to finish up the line. So I'm going to use that marking tool here to draw across. And remember, we're doing this at 1.5 inches, not 2 inches, otherwise we'll make the t-shirt too short. So now I'm going to go ahead and move this and readjust if I need. Another way you could choose to do this, if you own a rotary cutter and a cutting mat, and your t-shirt is the same length on both the front and the back, you can actually use the rotary cutter and your mat to cut the hem off that way. But today we're going to do this with scissors. So make sure your line is visible enough that you can see it all the way across. Another tip is to use a marking tool that you will know will disappear on your project. It's always a good idea to test it on a scrap piece or a piece of your t-shirt where you won't see it to make sure it will actually disappear. Okay, so now we're on to the other side of my shirt here. And I'm going to go ahead and line it up against that 1.5 inches again. And we're going to draw that line. I find these rulers to be a great way to do this because they're see-through, so I can very easily do this quickly and accurately. Another option you could use to draw your line on your fabric is a seam gauge, like this one here, or even just a tape measure. So now that I've drawn this line on both the front and the back of my t-shirt, I'm going to use my scissors to go ahead and remove it. So I'll start by making a small notch anywhere you would like on the t-shirt up to my line. And then readjust to nice and evenly cut it along your line here. This is where that rotary cutter and that mat really comes in handy because it's quick and easy, and it's also very accurate if you're not super great with scissors. All right, just keep cutting along that line. This is also where it's really ideal to have a nice sharp pair of scissors to do this with. And I'm taking my time. I don't want to rush this process because I want my hem to be even all the way through. Almost there. All right, and done. So our next step is to actually iron in our hem. So at this point, I'm going to turn the t-shirt inside out and lay it flat on my table or my ironing board. And I'm going to iron a hem that is 1/2 inch. That way I get that 2-inch hem that I'm looking for. So there are lots of different ways to do this. You could pre-mark your 1/2 inch line with a ruler going across the bottom and then iron it. You could also use a seam gauge to mark it first and then iron it. Or even easier, you can use a hot hemmer. So this is a really, really easy tool to use. It's a felt ruler that you can iron directly on. So this is what I'm going to use to make my hem today. So you're going to place this just along the edge of your fabric. And I'm going to fold the edge of my fabric right up to that 1/2 inch mark. And then grab your iron and we're going to press it in place. I highly recommend pressing this first, as it's going to make your hem sit a lot nicer and make it a lot easier for you to manage this in your sewing machine. Another thing you can do is use pins to help hold it in place when you place it in your machine as well. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. However many you'd like. I usually just use a few. Okay, and then I'm going to turn the t-shirt here and we're going to continue along with the hemming. Placing that ruler along here, folding it up to that 1/2 inch mark. And pressing. Now that I have that nice crisp line along the edge there, it's going to make this a lot easier for me to figure out exactly where I'm going to stitch and to be really accurate with the length. This method can really be used for any type of hemming as well. It doesn't have to just be on t-shirts. You can use this to hem your jeans or dresses or whatever other thing you need to hem. All right, keep it going. We're going to turn that again to do the next side. This is usually where I'm listening to a good playlist or a podcast or something to keep the time going. And these hot hemmers are good for other things too, not just hemming your clothing, but also doing like quilting techniques and bag making techniques. There's angles on these and they come in different shapes and sizes. I highly recommend checking out our website, qualitysewing.com, to find some others on there. This is an essential tool for your sewing kits. You can also feel free to use steam on this if you would like. You do not have to, but it is an option. All right, just one more section and we'll be ready to go. All right, perfect. So now that we have that all pinned and ironed in place, we're gonna go ahead and go over to our sewing machine and we're gonna hem. So if you notice, I have two different machines here, and we're gonna start with our standard domestic sewing machine. So right now I have the machine set up for a straight stitch, and I also have a twin needle on, and our twin needle is going to help ensure that this t-shirt retains stretch in between the stitches. So what we're gonna get is kind of that classic look that you'll see on an actual t-shirt you buy in the store. So for the twin needle that I'm using here, we are using a stretch twin needle with a 3.0 millimeter width. You can use different widths if you would like. It really depends on the project, but I definitely recommend testing it on a scrap piece before. So now that we have this all set up, you're going to want to make sure that you have 2 spools of thread in whatever color that will match your t-shirt, or maybe you want something contrasting. Today I'm using something that will be a little different than the t-shirt, but it's to show you so you can see the stitches here. Another thing to keep in mind is that you will actually be hemming this upside down for this technique. So a lot of this is going to be on feel, but also visibility. If you need to, you can also use a marking tool on your fabric to mark where you can kind of feel the edge of the hem. Today, I'm going to kind of just go by feel right in here, because the goal of this is we want to be able to catch the edge of that hem. We don't want to miss it. Otherwise, we would end up having to go back and fix it later. So I like to start somewhere on the side of the t-shirt, kind of where our sleeve is at. If your t-shirt has side seams, it'll kind of give you a good indication of where to start, but it is really up to you. And because I am doing a 1/2 inch seam allowance on the bottom of my t-shirt here, what I'm going to do is use the edge of my presser foot as my guide. So my needle position is currently over to the left side, because that way it ensures that the needles are going to hit the very edge of the fabric, and I kind of have something to follow. But you may need to adjust this depending on what size of twin needle width that you used, or the length or width of your presser foot. So we're going to go ahead and put that presser foot down, and I'm going to go ahead and start. So by using a twin needle, it's going to allow the thread to stretch in between the stitches at the back. So you're actually going to see a zigzag on the back of this, but 2 straight stitches on the top. Also, by using the stretch option of our twin needle, this is going to allow it to better puncture this fabric rather than pushing it down into the machine and causing issues later on. And I'm just taking those pins out as I go. Make sure to readjust as much as you need. If you're doing this on a smaller t-shirt, you can also remove the accessory case on your machine to access your free arm, so you can put the t-shirt around the free arm and move it that way. But because I'm doing a larger t-shirt, I don't really need to do that. can remember to just adjust as you need. I'm using that edge of the presser foot as my guide for this. All right, so now we're getting back to where we began. So what my goal is here is I want my stitches the best that I can to line back up with where I started. So I'm going to go a little slower once I get closer. Okay, so now my needles are right up to those lines, and I'm going to sew a little slow so I make sure that they overlap each other the best that I can. Okay, at this point you can also back stitch a bit just to ensure that it doesn't come undone over time. At this point we can go ahead and pull it out of our machine, grab my scissors or use my cutter on the machine and trim the threads. And here is our finished hem on the front of our t-shirt. So this is an awesome way to hem your shirts very simply on a domestic sewing machine. It still allows that fabric to restretch, and it also has a little bit of that zigzag that you're looking for at the back and beautifully covers both sides. So now I'm going to show you how you can do this on a cover hem machine. So let's go back over to our iron. So this would be the same process that I just did for hemming the shirt. You're going to decide how long you need it to be. You're going to cut off that excess, leaving a 1/2 inch, and you're going to hem it up and pin. I have already done that for us, so we don't have to spend a bunch of time ironing again. So I'm ready to go. Everything's pinned and in place, and we're going to go back over to our cover hem machine now. So on the cover hem machine, the process is going to be pretty similar to how it is on a sewing machine. You are still sewing this upside down. So with this one, you can still use a marking tool to kind of mark where the end of this hem is going to be, or you can do it by feel, which is how I'm going to do it at this moment. So once again, you're going to pick a spot to start. I usually like to start on the side. And my machine is currently set up for a cover hem wide. So the reason I like to do a wide versus a narrow is that the wide just covers a little bit more space and it makes it a little easier to not miss the edge. You can use a wide if you're looking, or a narrow if you're looking for a little bit more of a delicate, smaller stitch, but we're gonna go with the wide today. So I'm going to place my fabric underneath the presser foot so the needles are going to hit that fold that's underneath my fabric. And I can kind of feel it here too, so I can kind of eyeball it as I go through. Another really handy thing is that on the tip of your presser foot here, there's going to be their little lines. And each one actually lines up with the corresponding needle. And this is going to be a great visual to make sure that you're catching that edge. So once I'm in place, I'm going to put the presser foot down and I'm going to go ahead and start stitching. If something gets bunched up right when you start, that's okay. It happens. What happens usually is that the thread is getting caught on the foot somewhere, so we're going to pull that back just a bit. You make sure you want to catch that right away before you go too far. Otherwise, you're going to end up with a ruffled t-shirt, and we don't want that. All right, so let's get back into that. Make sure you pull those pins out as you go. And I'm just kind of feeling for that hem in there, or if you've drawn a visual, you're following that against this line right here on the end. The great thing about a cover hem machine is this is going to give you that really classic t-shirt look. And it's going to be strong, it's going to be long lasting, and give you a lot of stretch. Now with a cover hem machine, you need to be sewing in fabric. If you have a serger, on a serger you can typically sew off of a piece of fabric as long as you want, but cover hem is a little different. You will actually stop sewing in fabric, and I'll show you how to do that when we get to the end. All right, make sure if there's any loose tails anywhere that you pull those out of the way. We'll take care of those later. All right, so I'm getting back to where I began, and the technique is going to be the same for when you use a cover hem. You want to make sure that the two needles line up with the 2 rows of stitches that you left off on. So I kind of pull these tails forward so they don't get caught in anything. And then I'm going to go a little slow because I want to make sure that I'm doing my best to line up these previous stitches with my needles. If you really want to be accurate with it, you can always use the hand wheel on the side of the machine as well. When you do this, you just want to always move it forward, never backwards. Okay, so after I've stitched a couple stitches back over the top of what I've already done, is now when we want to lift our needles up. So I'm going to use that hand wheel, and now I'm going to use the presser foot lifter, and I'm going to lift my presser foot up. And at this point, I'm going to grab a pair of tweezers. So these tweezers in particular have a curve to the front of them, and I find this to be really helpful when I'm going to grab the threads here in a moment. So I'm going to squeeze the tweezers together. I'm going to lift the toe of my presser foot, and I'm going to swipe the tweezers underneath. So I'm grabbing the 2 needle threads. I'm on the top of the fabric, I am not underneath. And I'm going to pull these forward, okay? Now what I'm gonna do is grab my scissors and I'm going to cut this tail. This is gonna release it from the machine so it doesn't keep continuing to make a stitch because we need to be able to pull the fabric out. Now I'll pull my fabric backwards and we're still gonna have 1 more thread attached to it, and that's gonna be our looper thread. So once you've pulled it out so you see that looper thread, we're gonna go ahead and just cut that. So now you're probably wondering, what do I do with all of these funky threads that are hanging out down here? So with this, what you'll want to do is grab a hand sewing needle. You would take these tails that are sticking out the front of your t-shirt here in your hem, and these will be placed down to the back side of your fabric. Okay, so once these are to the back side, you can tie all of these loose tails here in one big knot and trim. Okay. I'm just going to go ahead and trim them for now for video's sake. But for strength and longevity of your stitches, it's highly recommended to pull them to the back and to tie them together. So now that that is complete, here we have a beautiful hem done on a cover stitch machine. So here we have those 2 parallel rows of stitches, we have nice stretch in between, and you have that beautiful zigzaggy appearance on the back covering that raw edge. If you have any questions about hemming t-shirts, please feel free to leave them in the comments below, and make sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel, our Facebook, our Instagram, and our TikTok, and we'll see you again next week for another segment of How Do I?